Welcome to Inside the Stories. I'm Tanika Douglas. Today we're at the Jamaica Broilers ethanol plant. And here today we will find out what is ethanol, what is the purpose of ethanol, and how has ethanol been impacting Jamaica. More and more countries around the world have become more conscious about the needs to take steps to preserve and protect our environment. With the devastating impact of greenhouse gases, rising oil prices, countries are seeking ways to potentially cut oil import costs and also to protect our environment. The introduction of ethanol has opened a global market that is doing just that, as ethanol helps reduce air pollution and it also delivers improved vehicle performance to consumers. Our country Jamaica has also come on board with Petrojam Ethanol producing 150 million liters of ethanol. This move was further complemented on July 26, 2006 when the Jamaica Broilers Group of Companies, the country's largest commercial poultry producer, invested just over 1 billion Jamaican dollars in a fuel ethanol dehydration plant. The plant located at Port Esquivel, St. Catherine was facilitated by a contract between Jamaica Broilers and a Brazilian firm which supplied the dehydration plant and equipment. But what is ethanol? How is it made? And how does it benefit Jamaica? These and more of your questions will be answered as we take a tour of the Jamaica Broilers ethanol plant. Jamaica Broilers is able to produce 60 million gallons of fuel-grade ethanol annually from the dehydration of hydrous ethanol imported from Brazil. This hydrous ethanol is made from sugar. The hydrous feedstock is called hydrous because it contains water. Therefore, the Jamaica Broilers' responsibility lies in extracting the water content from this hydrous feedstock to a quality of at least 99.7%. After processing, it then becomes anhydrous ethanol ready for export. The processing of hydrous ethanol commences with the feedstock being transmitted to the company via their export line. Technical contractor at the Jamaica Broilers ethanol plant, Ricardo Henry, takes us through the stages of how hydrous ethanol is processed.
What we have here is basically an import and export line. What it really does is basically we get the hydrous, and that hydrous is fed from the ports into our receiving tanks here, which is a hydrous holding tank. Now basically holds about 3.6 million gallons, and we feed the plant from that storage. Now a pump takes that and carries it to the dehydration area. Now the dehydration area, as you can see on that far side. Good? Alright. Now the process really starts where another pump from another storage tank, if you take a close-up view on that side, and it pumps it through two heat exchangers and then to an heater, to the evaporator, through a superheater where it is superheated to get rid of mist and stuff like that. Then it is fed into a malt sieve. Now that malt sieve contains zeolite, and the zeolite itself is made of potassium aluminum silicate, and what that really does is an absorbent, and it really takes the water out of the hydrous solution. Now the chemistry behind all of this is that the zeolite have certain pores. You expect that it would absorb the water molecules because the water molecules is much smaller than the alcohol molecules. So the alcohol molecules is fed through the bed because it is too large to pass into the zeolite pores. Now as it passes through, and dependent on the cycle time in the molecular sieve, what you have is a situation where the anhydrous, now that product, is then passed to a reboiler or a condenser dependent on your temperatures and pressure regulations. Now where we have the malt sieve, it is considered to be 94% efficient, so that 6% of regen is basically sent back to a distillation column, and that column itself now concentrate that 70% alcohol to hydrous quality again at about 95.5% alcohol, and that is then fed back to your hydrous feed tank again, and the process repeats itself, meaning that you have a closed system, and in that event you maximize your alcohol content, so nothing is gonna waste basically. Now, in a situation where you have the reboiler considered to be very efficient because you use your anhydrous to some degree to heat up your column, so is all temperature transfer mechanism is utilized to the fullest, and that's the basic idea where you would ask yourself, how did this product really get rid of the water that is fed into the bed? Of course, after regen, it has to go under vacuum. A vacuum pump is attached to the system, creates vacuum in the system, and of course it releases that water. Now, and that is what, as I mentioned before, sent to the distillation column in order to concentrate it back to hydrous quality. We also have a cooling tower here, where basically that tower, the cooling mechanism through your heat exchangers and your condenser. Of course, when the water comes in, it is heated. Now you have a updraft fan, which really is to get rid of the heat. As you know, hot air rise, cold air sinks. So what happens is that the hot air rises, the cold air sinks, and of course that water is sent back to your dehydration tower in order for the process to take place again. These are basically your fire prevention system, where in the event that you have a fire, for God forbid we don't have any, this is your water system, this is your foam system. Why foam? Is basically ethanol is a very volatile substance, and you consider that if you have a fire in any of these tanks, water cannot hold that fire. So what you need is a foaming agent that you can dump in the system that can of course suppresses that flame and get rid of it eventually. If you look alongside here, you can see these tanks here is a hydrous tank.
Located on the plant are cooling tanks. These tanks help to cool water needed for operational purposes.
That green structure I look in there at is a cooling tower, and basically what you have is 4 updraft fans that really cools the water and get it back to operational condition. Considering that through the process we have a lot of heat being exchanged, then you want to get that back now to condition it back to operational condition. The chemistry is that the hot air rises, the cold air sinks, you get rid of the heat. This is our RO unit, and our RO unit is basically reverse osmosis, and of course this is where all the treatment of water is done. Then raw water comes in, it is processed through this RO and then sent to the storage tank, and this storage tank is one for the boiler, one for the cooling tower. And what it does is basically to treat the water so that of course all the different what you would consider possibilities, scalings and all of these things that can cause corrosion and these things in the cooling tower and your boiler. So what you do is to try to get rid of those compounds. So cooling tower, to the cooling tower and to the boilers.
The operations at the ethanol plant is also complemented by technology. The company has a database which outlines the step-by-step procedures of the plant. It also provides a direct link in which the company can continue and discontinue any happenings on the plant.
What you're looking at is the beginning of the process, dehydration process, and this tank nearest to it here is a hydrous feed tank. Now a pump takes that and pump it through 2 heat exchangers, then through an heater to the evaporator in order to evaporate the substance, and of course then to a superheater where it is highly superheated to get rid of the mist, and then to the molecular sieve. In the molecular sieve, what you have is a lot of zeolites. It is full of zeolites, and the molecular sieve we mentioned is those 3 vessels up top, those 3 big vessels. Now inside that vessel, as mentioned, is potassium aluminum silicate known as zeolite, and what it does is an absorbent, and this absorbs the water from the hydrous. Now the chemistry behind this is that the water molecules is much smaller than the ethanol molecules, so what will happen is that the ethanol molecules will not pass into the zeolites. Now it will pass through the bed and of course convert it to product, and then it passes to a condenser where it cools, converted to liquid, of course from the vapor state to liquid, and of course dependent on pressures and temperature regulation, the reboiler of course gets a portion of that anhydrous content. Now what happens to the reboiler? We are using the anhydrous basically to heat the column so that you use up as much as possible the heat that you would have created during the dehydration process. Now that anhydrous then is then carried to that tank to the left where it is considered to be the holding tank, and of course it is then transferred to storage, and storage of course anhydrous alcohol.
After processing has completed, then dehydrated ethanol is ready for export and is transmitted via the plant export line to port. Let's take a look at how the ethanol dehydration plant evolved. Plant manager Mr. John Cabry shares how the idea was conceptualized and how it has been impacting operations at the Jamaica Broilers. But first, let's find out what ethanol is.
Question is, what really is ethanol? Ethanol, perhaps in its simplest terms, is an alcohol. There are several types of alcohols. You know, perhaps in your home you have rubbing alcohol, which is not ethanol but another type of alcohol. I think it's isopropanol. You have different grades of alcohols. Ethanol is one such grade. Ethanol is produced from the fermentation of in our case sugarcane, but not limited to sugarcane. There is also ethanol that can be produced from corn, as I mentioned earlier. Ethanol can also be produced just from the breakdown of any organic matter. So ethanol is really a form of alcohol and is one of many types of alcohol, but it has specific properties that make it suitable and ideal for use as a fuel raw material in cars and vehicles.
Mr. Cabry noted that the ethanol plant has positively contributed to the Jamaica Broilers Group.
The JB Ethanol, which is the subsidiary that Jamaica Broilers Group created to operate this investment, has made a positive contribution so far to the group's financial figures. It increases the revenue, and the hope and expectation, and indeed reality, is that the profit margins that the group experiences, the profit base, should also be expanded. So this would be a very good move for the shareholders of the Jamaica Broilers Group of companies, and by extension for the nation at large.
According to Mr. Cabry, the plant has also been creating jobs.
Well, it provides employment, and it's fairly technical. It moves away from the kind of brown to jobs that employ the best, the cream of the crop, as it were, in terms of educational background. It's technology intensive, it's not labor intensive, and so it exposes the Jamaican workforce, or a small percentage of the Jamaican workforce, to opportunities to grow technically
Although Jamaica Broiler's ethanol plant is fairly young, the company is hoping to make a contribution to foreign exchange earnings.
The company is just a few months old, and the plan is that it will make a very positive contribution to foreign exchange earning in Jamaica. As you know, our market is the US, and so all of the revenue earned is in US. Yes, some of the expenses are also US based, but the extent to which the company makes a good profit, it will also help the country's exchange rate.
Mr. Cabri also explains why Brazil was chosen to supply the dehydration plant and equipment.
Brazil is the leader in ethanol, in the ethanol industry globally. From the 1970s, Brazil as a nation decided to strategically move away from petroleum and move towards renewable fuels. They invested heavily over the 30 or 40 years subsequent in sugar and sugarcane technology. Brazil definitely is one of the global leaders in ethanol production and ethanol dehydration, and was a logical choice for us when we were pursuing ethanol dehydration technology.